Diving looks calm, but the experience is more than that. Hey, I'm Yufong. I'm an international student in Australia, and a few weeks ago, during my semester break, I joined a party open water diving course. This isn't a guide or a promotion, I just want to share what the experience was actually like. For a party open water course, the first step is simply booking it. If you're doing this with friends or a partner, it can be cheaper. I didn't have a partner, so I booked it by myself, and that was completely fine. They usually organize small groups anyway. In my case, it was around four students with one instructor, so going alone wasn't really an issue. After booking, you receive a confirmation email. That email includes instruction for the medical form and the learning component. I chose to do the e-learning rather than in-person sessions. The e-learning itself wasn't difficult. You can take your time and the quizzes can be retaken if needed. Personally, I felt it was more about getting familiar with the basics. Most of the real learning happened during the actual dives with the instructor. One thing I didn't fully realize at first was the dive locations. I didn't know the exact sites until the first day. The locations were quite far, and public transport wasn't always practical. Since I don't drive, transport was something I had to think about. Once that was done, it was really just about preparing for the dive days themselves, getting ready for the schedule, transport, and what to bring. The course normally runs over 3 days. For the first day, I arrived at the dive center in the morning. That was when I met the other participant and the instructors. It is probably a good idea to say hello early, since they might become your group members and instructor for the next few days. The first thing we did was gear fitting, wetsuits, BCDs, masks, and fins. It was slightly awkward. Everyone was trying to find space to change, and the wetsuit was tighter than I expected. I had to wiggle into mine like a caterpillar. After finding our size, we learned it how to set up and connect the equipment, attaching the tank, checking the air, and making sure everything was secure. We practiced this a few times. The instructors went through and checked step by step, and after a while, it becomes natural. Once that session finished, we had a break for lunch. After lunch, we moved to an aquatic center, basically a public swimming pool. Before getting into the gear, there were some basic water requirements, about 10 minutes of floating and a 200-meter swim. At first, I thought swimming 200 meters continuously might be challenging, but there was no time pressure. You could go at your own pace. If you're comfortable in water, it is manageable. Then we geared up again and started the confined water training session. The instructor demonstrated everything first, and we practiced it one by one. These were the skills we would later perform in open water. It was preparation for the actual dive. Here is one small moment I remember clearly. During one of the first drills, I forgot that I was already breathing through the regulator. I surfaced it to take a breath, and then realized I didn't need to. It was slightly embarrassing, but it was just part of getting used to the equipment. Even though it was only a pool session, it already gave me a sense of being underwater. The longer I stayed submerged, the colder I felt. By the end of the day, I was already tired, but also curious about what the real ocean would feel like in the next morning. Day 2 was our first open water dive at Rapper Bay. It was already cold on land, so I expected the water to be colder. Once everyone arrived, we geared it up and walked it down towards the sea. The first impression was simple, cold and salty. We stayed at the surface for a short while as the instructor set up a rope for us to hold during the descent. It made going down more stable. Then we followed the instructor underwater. Most of what we did was repeating the skill from the pool, but the feeling was different in the open water. The sea water felt sharper when clearing the mass. The sea felt heavier. At one point, one of our group members felt anxious and could not continue. The instructor brought him up while the rest of us waited under sea. After a while, he returned it and we continued. When we finished, we surfaced it and removed our gear. That member stayed with the instructor to complete the remaining skill. What you are seeing now is footage I took before entering the water. Unfortunately, I did not film underwater at Rapid Bay. Later on, I find that the conditions that they were considered very good, so I do regret not bringing the dive camera down, but that is also part of the experience. There were no proper changing facility at the site, so everything felt a bit more basic. Compared to day one, this session felt shorter but more intense. If I were to do it again, I would probably wear footwear that is easier to remove since everything get wet. So for the final day, day 3 was at Port Noarlunga. The morning routine was the same, waking up early, meeting at the dive center, and driving to the site. By this point, everything felt more familiar. Putting on the gear and setting up the equipment felt natural. It was still cold, still salty. That part did not change. What changed it was the confidence. We had two dives that day. The first one was focused on completing the remaining required skill. Nothing new, just repeating what we had already practiced it. The second dive was different. It was more relaxed. No skill to demonstrate. We simply followed the instructor underwater and explored the sea. Now, as you're seeing this footage, the visibility is not very clear. The water that day was more green and blurry. Later, the instructor mentioned that this is actually quite normal for the diving conditions here. It was different from Rapid Bay. In some way, I still regret not filming underwater there when the visibility was better. That was the final day. The last dive felt less like training and more like experience. By the time we surfaced it for the last time, it felt complete. So overall, this is how I felt about the whole journey. Technically, this was not my first dive. About 6 years ago, I tried a discovery dive while traveling. An instructor was attached behind me, guiding everything. I honestly forgot most of that experience. This time felt very different. During my semester break, I wanted to try something new. Diving was always somewhere in the back of my mind. Nature in Australia is appealing, so I booked the open water course about 2 months in advance, mainly because it was summer. I thought the water might be warmer. I was still cold. The e-learning was not stressful at all. I finished it about a week before and forgot most of it anyway, but that turned out to be fine. The real learning happens during the dives. I chose a 5-star dive center. At the time, I did not fully understand what that meant. Looking back, what matters more was not the label, but the instructor. My instructor was friendly and straightforward, relaxed on the surface, joking around, but very focused and reliable underwater. That balance made a big difference. When one of our group members struggled, he handled it calmly. In those moments, you really feel how important the instructor is. I booked it alone and did not have a partner, so the group was randomly arranged. Over the 3 days, something small but natural formed between us. It is interesting how quickly people can connect when learning something new together. I was also surprised that everyone was more relaxed and friendly than I expected. I imagined something more formal and strict. It was structured, but not intense in a negative way. The cold and salty water, though, was real. I could not stop shivering when we are not moving much. Other member kept giving me hand signal to check if I was okay. I was fine, just cold. At the end of it, I would say it was an interesting and valuable experience. Now I have the open water certificate, which allows me to dive up to 80 meters. More than that, it gave me confidence. I do not think I will dive all the time, but I can see myself doing it occasionally during breaks. It feels like something I would return to at the right time. Before finishing, there are a few things I think are worth knowing. First, diving is not automatically relaxing. It can look calm in videos, but the process of learning is physical. The gear is heavy, the water can be cold. Second, open water feels different from a pool. The visibility is not always clear. The water can be green, blurry, or colder than expected. That is normal. Third, nervous moments are normal too. Forgetting to breathe slowly, losing the regulator, feeling slightly anxious during a skill. This thing happened. What helped was staying calm and trust the instructor. And finally, diving takes time. It is not just the dive itself, there is preparation, early mornings, travel, and repetition. It is not spontaneous. If you're curious and patient, it is manageable. So that's the end of this video. I'm Uform. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.